Welcome, everybody, to the Talking Pools podcast, Thursdays with Wayne and Steve. Hope everybody's had a fantastic week. Y'all know that I'm over here on the East Coast in the Baltimore area, and yeah, it actually snowed a little bit this morning, so Steve is really, really jealous over there on the West Coast.
Yeah, absolutely jealous of all the snow.
Well, we have a very, very special broadcast today. We have with us Richard LaMotte of the LaMotte Company, one of the sponsors of our Thursdays with Wayne and Steve podcast. And I'm really excited about this because, Richard, you and I have known each other for too many years, and we probably want to tell people, but it's at least 30, right, at least 3 decades. And Richard is intimately involved, obviously, with LaMotte. And what we'd like to do is just kind of introduce Richard, and we're going to talk a little bit about the company and what's going on, and maybe what's going on in the future and things like that. So Richard, why don't you tell everybody on the podcast, who are you and what do you do at LaMotte?
My current role right now is business development. So, we've done a decent job in the pool market, and we've been looking at other avenues to sell some of our products. In the case of the spin meter, which a lot of people know about, there's a lot of other areas that can be served, whether it's aquarium, aquaculture. We're actually getting some of those instruments into, believe it or not, hospitals and universities because of the zebrafish industry. And that's, I know, a little bit off topic with pools, but actually it's pretty fascinating. What happens is these small zebrafish are used in these places, these research places, by the thousands and thousands. And what happens is they actually have to keep the water chemistry just right, because they will inject these little fish with all sorts of unknown diseases to kind of detect what's going on, what treatment might help. Boston Children's Hospital is a big one doing this. And so they can actually track and see the changes of what's going on in these fish very quickly because of their metabolism and how similar they are to us. And so they use some of our spin meters to keep the water chemistry checked on, because they don't want that interfering with the research. So NIH, a lot of these places are doing that. And it's just a very unusual specialty application. But wherever there's water, we try to get our fin in the water, let's say.
I always tell people it's a toe in the pool water. But no, it's true. And as an individual company, you need to expand out, and you need to develop other areas in which your products can apply. And that's a perfect example of getting into an area that is not even remotely associated with pools and spas. But no, that's so give us a real brief history on LaMotte. And while you do that, I'm going to attempt to pull up the picture of somebody that I think we all know and know about. So let's see if I can do this.
Right. I'll see if you get that picture up, and if you do, you don't, that's fine.
Yeah, no, but we'll get there. We'll get there. I'm just not sure how easily it's going to be, but please talk.
Yeah,
talk
I'll go ahead and talk while you try to work with this technology stuff.
Okay.
But what happened was my grandfather back in 1919 left DuPont. He was up in the Wilmington area and left DuPont to start his own company because he saw that the Germans had all the pH indicators and there was no pH indicators available in the U.S. suddenly because of war. And so he started his own testing company in downtown Baltimore in 1919. So that started really doing the first pH kits that you could actually carry, walk around, and test on site versus doing major lab chemistry. And by the mid-20s, he had a friend. My grandfather graduated from Hopkins and then went to University of Wisconsin at Madison. And he settled back into Baltimore, where the family was from. And what happened was, there's a picture. What happened was he had good friends from Hopkins, including Dr. Enslow. And this Dr. Enslow, Lynn Enslow, he was one of the ones that worked with the first chlorination treatments of drinking water. And he knew a little bit about orthotolidine. So he and my grandfather got together in the mid-1920s and did this first test kit with pH and orthotolidine so public health officials could go out and check pools. And that's really where the pool test kit business took off in the mid-20s. And then it kind of went on from there. We were lucky to get through the Depression. We had a fair amount of medical equipment that we were making, things for different test like trichinosis and all these other things like that. It's kind of fascinating, some of the old stuff they were working on. And then by, the 30s and 40s, we'd moved from downtown Baltimore out toward Towson, closer to where your old folks are at Taylor. And then in the mid 50s, and that's the old original lab. You'll see if you see the video, that was the lab downtown. I believe that's my grandfather in the back, right?
And it's funny, Richard, it's funny. We have this, or Taylor also had this picture in one of the conference rooms when I first started there, because the first second I thought, wait a minute, that is, isn't it? So, yep, no, I know this picture well.
Yeah, so Dr. Taylor might be there, because what a lot of people won't know until they hear this podcast is Dr. Taylor worked for my grandfather. And so in the late 90s, when my grandfather was asked by DuPont to do a special project out in Montana, he moved out there for what was going to be 6 months, and it became closer to a year. He had my uncle Charles at the time out there. And when he got back, Dr. Taylor's like, I'm having fun running this company. And so he decided in 1930 to start his own company. And now I'm sure that never happens in the pool industry, where you have somebody who comes up and trained and then goes off and starts their own business.
Never, no.
That's why people are like, oh, you're both in Maryland? Yeah, because Dr. Taylor worked for my grandfather, and he started his own company doing his own thing. In 1955, my grandfather then fell in love with the Eastern Shore of Maryland and decided to move over to this quiet area of Maryland. And we'll fast forward a few years to, it's great until during the pandemic and you can't find people to work. So that's kind of in the 50s. What's interesting is a lot of neat things started to happen. In the late 50s, Dr. Palin over in England developed this little tablet called the DPD tablet. And he was working with that. He developed it for drinking water applications. He was part of the Waterworks Association over there. So he had everything dialed in really nicely to read from like 0 to 3 or 4. He came to us with that tablet, and everything looked good. And so we launched that tablet in 1968. There's the roulette comparator. I'll talk about that for a second. But what I can tell you about in just a second, 1968, we brought it in and started selling the DPD tablet in the U.S. And it was interesting because it really did take off from a public health standpoint. They really wanted to know free chlorine versus total. Originally with drinking water, you want to keep total chlorine in solution going all the way out to the end of the pipes. But for pools, they wanted to know free chlorine. And so that was a major bonus for us to get that. I remember when I started back in 1984, I was able to meet Dr. Tom Palin when he was here. We still had a great relationship with them. And then in the late 80s, they decided they wanted to come into the U.S. And so we had to start making DPD on our own here in the United States. We had a good relationship, but you know how it goes. The company they had, Wilkinson and Simpson at the time, sold off to Alma. And, when big companies buy up other companies, sometimes they have very quick visions of how they could really grow things fast. So they wanted to come into the U.S., and that got us into making our own DPD. But that roulette comparator, do you want to show that again? I'm not sure how.
Yeah. Let me bring that one up. Now that I can actually figure out what it is on earth I'm doing.
Before I saw the picture, I was like, what is a roulette? I was like, roulette, I'm thinking roulette wheel. And then I just saw the picture and I'm like, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, so it looks like an actual roulette wheel, and it is about the size of one. So that's a pretty big comparator. So if you imagine all those ampules around that circle in the roulette comparator, it's this large round disc, almost like a bowl, that has just about every pH standard from like 3.0 to 11 or 12 in the top of it. And so there's a big light bulb in the center of it. And when you plug it in, turn it on, we still have one up in our new facility in Newark, Delaware, but you turn on and the light comes out the front. And so you match to the standards as it goes by. So for labs, it was really handy to have this thing you could rotate all the way around to look at your pH difference between a 3.4 to 3.6 or whatever, because they were doing all sorts of testing. They didn't just want one comparator for low range, high range, and mid range or whatever. They actually needed these types of things. And so when you look at that now and you look at what the spin meter is, it's like a micro version of that for 10 tests.
Yeah,
It's like everything, it's like the phones and everything, it just got smaller and smaller over time.
that's right. Yeah. And in
But I
fact,
think,
what I'm going to do is bring up a picture of the Spin Touch that everybody knows about.
right.
The mobile WaterLink Spin Touch allows pool and spa professionals the ability to test water in the field. A patented WaterLink Spin reagent disc is used with the innovative photometer to measure 10 different tests in just 60 seconds. That's right, just 60 seconds, and you'll have results displayed simultaneously on the photometer's touchscreen. That's not all. You also have the ability to send the data through Bluetooth into a smartphone or a tablet device. The photometer can measure free chlorine, bromine, total chlorine, combined chlorine, pH, alkalinity, hardness, cyanuric acid, copper, iron, phosphate, borate, biguanide shock, and salt. The water analysis can be proactive since they are able to measure all of these important tests and recommend correct procedures to fix their water chemistry issues when using our WaterLink Solutions Pro software program. It allows pool and spa analysts the best way to achieve precise results. So simple, anyone can use it. This is the most advanced system for precise use of wet chemistry methods ever produced. Pool and spa analysts can achieve precision without time-consuming tests or cleanup procedures. This groundbreaking analysis system is so simple, no vials to fill, no prep time, no guessing. To learn more about this innovative lab, visit www.waterlinkspintouch.com. Again, www.waterlinkspintouch.com.
Well, I think the other thing which was kind of interesting back in the late 50s too is we had the Jonas Salk vaccine came out, and one of the things they found early on was that if the vaccine arrived at the doctor's office and it was spoiled, it wouldn't work. So they couldn't cure polio with it, and they had some issues. But they realized that if it went off a certain pH, then they would know it's gone bad and didn't make it through the shipment. So we actually started providing all the pH indicator for the Jonas Salk vaccines, and that really helps build the company when you have a worldwide demand for pH. What you have up on screen is like the miniature version. That little disc down there is like a miniature version of what we had back then, and I can talk more about that later because that's more the modern things. But in general, that device took about 7 years to develop for the pool industry, and it was specifically made for that industry. But we'll talk.
I have to interject something funny. The very first time I saw the Spin Touch was at the Pool Industry Expo, the Pie Show in Monterey, and it must have been, late 90s, maybe, something like that. And I remember walking by, and the first thing I said was like, holy shit, that's pretty cool. That's like really, really cool.
Yeah.
And look how it's developed over the years since then. I mean, you've got a portable unit now. You've got, this, the one we had on the screen, a desk version. So yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I can go back and tell you how all that evolved, because what happened was we originally had the WaterLink meters.
Right.
But I was just going to go back to finish something on the old things that went back a ways. Back in the 30s and 40s, there wasn't a lot of new innovation then. Most of the wet chemistry was still kind of going along kind of slow and all that. But there was a lot of innovation and change going on. Let me turn my ringer off because I was talking to you earlier. And that there's a lot of changes going on during that time. And that's when we brought in DPD and all that. But it was in the 60s and 70s, late 60s and 70s, that we started doing instrumentation, colorimeters that could actually read the reactions. And that really helped make things more precise. So then we started doing these countertop labs for the pool stores where you could bring in a sample, run a test, doing all these titrations and all that, which we know takes a lot of time. And so when I came into the industry in 1984, I did my first pool show that November. I can't recall if that was in DC or where it was, and I could tell that the people come in and look at the thing and say, "Oh my God, this thing looks so complex" and all that. So a year or two later, I said, okay, let's overhaul this. Let's do, easy read labels. And also, that's when in 1987, our big launch was the WaterLink meter by itself. This is the one that finally hooked up to a computer,
Right.
got results and all these things like that. And that was when we launched that in 1987. And that really helped. Really, our company, when I first started, was about equal parts pool, some scientific education equipment for the science teachers and some universities, and also industrial boiler cooling and all those things that I know Taylor really is big on. But we had about 4 different large markets, and pool was just one of those. Now it's pretty big. It's 70-80% of our business. But I think the countertop lab part of that business really helped us get going.
Yeah, when the computer systems started being developed and were a little bit more user friendly, yeah, I remember that vividly. And the comments back then are exactly what you said. It's got too complicated. We can't do this kind of stuff.
Right.
But it's gotten a whole lot easier now. I mean, we've got these stupid little things that we hold in our hands.
Yeah.
And it does pretty much.
Wayne, they were talking shit about the iPhone when the iPhone first came out too. You know what I mean? And now look at where we are with that. Now, Richard, I had a question for you. You went through 2 wars. So you started in 1918 and then you went through, we're now in 1960, 1980. I'm a big history buff. And a lot of the books that I've read and things like that with the car companies and everybody was like for the war effort, right? So was there anything that you guys had to, during World War I and during World War II where you had to, the government came and said, hey, you guys aren't going to do this anymore. We want you to help with this. And there was a lot of companies where they were like, you know what? We're not a car company anymore. We're now manufacturing, military grade shells for tanks or whatever it may be. And I just loved the way that the country came together. And I just wanted to know, and, I'm sure the listeners would want to know too, is there anything that you guys had to kind of say, hey, let's put this on the shelf because right now, America first.
Right. We did not, to my knowledge, have any type of forced product line change. We did.
Forced.
Yeah. We were doing a lot for the medical industry back then. So there's probably a lot of those things going overseas. The fact that they were testing drinking water and they provide drinking water and treated drinking water with chlorine, because by then, 1908 is when they first started using chlorination. And by then they were really into it. So we did have, for years, we had what we called like a Department of Defense kit, which was you measured every element of chlorine, free chlorine, combined chlorine. There's also chloramines, trichlorines, dichloramines, all these tablets. And like the last thing a pool person would ever want to worry about. So we did some of that, but it wasn't a really hard hit on us. But we were fortunate enough to have enough medical equipment and things where I'd heard during the Depression from my family that we'd have to have an employee go to the back of the bank in downtown Baltimore and do a secret knock to drop off the deposit because in the front of the bank, you don't want to be anywhere near that. There was a lot of bad things going on.
Yeah.
So we were fortunate to get through that time, and so was Taylor to get through those hard times in the early 30s.
Yep.
But yeah, it wasn't so much that, but to fast forward, Steve, to go to the more modern war, which was on COVID, we had made some solid commitments to some people, some large companies in 2019 of like, this is what we're going to do for disc. Everything's fine. We've got this new machine that's going to be coming to us in the late spring of 2020. And there's very specific designs in the machines that make these spin disc and fills them and all that. It's a very complex operation. And what happened was out west, where these guys do this for us, they were shut down like a hammer and said, unless you're working on medical equipment, you cannot be in business. And so that started one of our nightmares for spin disc. And then COVID, everybody wanted spin disc, and we only had 3 or 4 machines to do them, and we really needed that extra machine, and that's when we got a little behind on spin disc. So, and then we fortunately, like a lot of pool companies, caught up on all that. And then, just recently, it's like, okay, we've got 2 facilities full-time making spin disc, and then all of a sudden, everybody had enough spin disc, and that's when we said, okay, aquaculture, aquarium, zebrafish.
What else can we do with this? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I'm tasked with right now, because I was VP of marketing sales for about 35 years. Started off in advertising here, but really it's a matter of looking where else we can use some of the technology we have. And when we designed that instrument, it was so focused on the pool store, we didn't think really that the service people would really be that interested in it. Matter of fact, the first one looked like a big dome and didn't even have a display. Then the pool service people was like, no, we need something like this because we got to get in and out of pools fast, and we need to know more than just chlorine and pH. And so that's when we decided to do the actual Spin Touch with the display and portable ones. But to go back to what Wayne was talking about earlier, what happened was we had automated labs back in those days we were talking about late 2000 or early 2000s. But it was in 2012 that the actual spin meter first came out, and that was the dome style one. And then in 2016, late 2015, 2016 is when the Spin Touch came out. And it's amazing how many service companies now are buying those because they don't want to sit around and just do wet chemistry as much as they used to. They can put a disc in, walk away, clean out their skimmer basket, and the results are right there. And they don't have any surprises a few weeks later when an iron issue comes up in that pool or something else comes up, phosphates. I mean, phosphates have been quite the blessing for protecting pipes, but not for salt chlorinators, and they could be a mess. And that was something that, Wayne, you got to agree, about 10 years or so ago, 10, 15 years ago, you never heard much about.
What's a phosphate? Yeah, exactly right.
And Flint, Michigan didn't help, because after that, people are like, we got to coat the heck out of these pipes. And Flint, Michigan really showed the drinking water industry what can happen if we're not protecting our pipes. But with all that phosphate going through the pipes, it goes into the pool and doesn't do good things.
No, it's not a good relationship. No, that's
so
putting it mildly.
Just going back to some of the other things that obviously the labs we did, but then in 1996, we came out with the test strips. You remember the Insta test strips. And a funny story there is that our owner of the company, have been and still owned. Oh, there it is on the right. Your strip search is over. We ran that ad and went out to the Western Pool and Spa Show and brought that guy who's one of our employees. And we put the outfit on, the policeman's outfit. And he said, as we were taking his picture, he goes, guys, I'm not used to being on this side of the badge. And so we took him out there for that show. And what happens is, if you've been to Western Pool and Spa Show, you probably remember this guy named Little Algae, right? He used to like that. He was a character. We loved him. So he tried to reach around to one of my other employees who was a girl to give her a little pinch on the butt during a photo shoot. He missed and got him.
Well, it is California, so no, never mind.
But since you have the other picture up, so in case people aren't watching, it's a picture of a guy dressed up as a police officer with a bathing suit and an Insta test bottle in his hand that says your strip search is over. And that's because we finally did an instant strip versus the 30 seconds. Because back then, the AquaCheck one was 30 seconds. They've shortened it since then. But what happened was funny is at the Phoenix show, we were down there and we were just launching the strip. So we went out to dinner. And we see some of the guys from ETS a couple of tables away. And you know how it is when you're at a pool show, you end up seeing your competitors.
You know everybody and you see everybody.
And they're sitting with some guys we thought we recognized from Hawk. And we're like, that's funny. Why are these guys talking to Hawk? Well, a little while later, Hawk was owned by. But the longest short of that is that, for instance, that other picture you had up there with the pool lab guy, that was the guy who we'd heard from a lot of people on the pool dealer side that they bring in their nephews or cousins to run water tests, and they really need something easier to run. They really want something easy, spits out results, because they don't want their teenager giving recommendations and all that. And so that's why we did the ad saying, we're ready to make a chemist out of any gnarly dude, which, and it was just basically putting it out there like, hey, look, the industry needs something easy in the store, because the owner, he's busy selling pools and doing the big stuff, and maybe his spouse is busy maybe doing some of these things, but that was kind of what we went after. But so to go back to the spin, what happened was these service guys kept coming to us, say, yeah, we need something, because when we go to a pool, we can do a quick strip test. We can do some other wet tests real quick, but we do want to test every once in a while for the whole cycle of everything so we don't get caught off guard. Because in the recent report that came from PHTA, this report here, it said that the average service company, and I was amazed to hear this, was only in business about 10 years or so. Maybe they just interviewed the wrong people, but I was really amazed to see that. But if you think about it, if they lose customers, they then have to start going further and further away from the core bench. Let's say have a bunch of people in like a neighborhood or something like that. And it's tough. Sometimes they have to be able to say, look, I'm sorry that storm came through after I was gone. Well, nowadays with your phone and all that, you can say, look, I was here. This is what I did on that date. These ways to cover your
Steve knows this one really well.
Yep.
So the technology helps defend these guys now. And that really is great because these guys need to get paid for what they do. And it's not an easy job running out there day in, day out, 5-6 days a week working. And what's good about these digital analyzers too is that they can work day or night, and not that they want to, but it doesn't matter visually what you have to see.
Right.
But go ahead, Wayne. You probably have another question.
Well, yeah, I do actually. When we in the pool industry, we tend to do things way ahead of time, so that the current rash of upcoming trade shows will be for the upcoming pool buying season for 2025. So we kind of tend to prepare ahead. So I guess a real good question is that what's LaMotte going to be promoting, or are you able to tell us what's coming up for the next pool season that we can look forward to from you guys?
Well, to quite honestly, what we're doing primarily is capacity. We ran behind with some tablets this year, so we've increased capacity there. The disc. So for the pool focus, we've really worked on trying to make production do a lot better from a standpoint of capacity planning and all that. And so one of the tough things is when you don't have, like when we had the spikes from COVID, we were getting a demand of over 55% more each year, 2 years in a row. And the capacity was only being able to bring it up 20-25%. So that's when the parent company, Arthur H. Thomas Company, has owned us since 1983, before I came along. They actually said, look, we've got to put another building up, or at least have another place where we can hire people quickly and all that. So it needed to be outside of Chestertown, so up in Newark, Delaware. That's why we have a lot of our spin machines up there making these discs all the time. So production has become a real priority. But also what happened during COVID was the demand for DPD just took a dive, right? Because pools were shutting down. A lot of these pools, like government pools in some countries, were not even allowed to be open. And so we were in a surplus of tablets. And then all of a sudden when it came out, not only did the pools come back heavy, but a lot of these countries, which would be places like Mexico and some of these other countries that you wouldn't expect to really want to be taking care of their drinking water. I mean, some other countries that you would be surprised with. I mean, everybody knows Japan is anal, so they're going to be
right.
But all of a sudden, these other countries were saying, okay, we need, several million of these tablets. And so all of a sudden, demand just went rocketing. So we have another operation now to help us catch up on tablets, but it really, really crushed us this past year to get some of the pool kits out that we needed. So we've gone into repair mode there. But one of the things we can tell people is this time next year, I think you'll see a new spin meter.
Okay.
And hopefully without the little black cover that you have to put on. So that's one little tidbit I can leak out there. That's, the meters that right now are in fine shape. There's nothing wrong with them. But what happens is with instruments, you have to plan several years ahead, because sooner or later something on the electronics board or whatever has changed, or whatever is going out of circulation. And part of that is because the cell phone industry, they're so quick to change things that a lot of times parts that are used on these electronic boards can be, just phased out over time.
Yeah, they're obsolete before they even are introduced sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to give you one example of things like that can happen, we use an assortment of 6 LEDs in this meter. And there's 2 green ones, but the green LEDs are very important for like the DPD, pH test, and some of these tests where it goes through a filter, then through a sensor and all that. But the green LEDs in the LED business, they want to be brighter and brighter because they want them in stoplights. So what's happened is these guys have been phasing out the medium tone LEDs for just the bright ones. And so that just throws up. So all of a sudden we have to stop making meters and redo boards and do all these things. And those are the headaches that people don't see behind the scenes, but boy, they're driving nuts.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. I remember very, very well.
Also, new LEDs means more pricing too. So now things become more expensive and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And just
so
everything.
During COVID, we ran into that where some of the boards, like for instance, we have this little color cue meter where during COVID, we weren't selling that probably at a profit or much profit at all because the board that went in there, we had to pay a premium for those to get those boards on hand. You know what I mean? Because everybody wanted electronics from Taiwan. You remember hearing about the cars parked for miles with no electronics. Mm. So we had orders and it delayed a lot of those color cue meters because of the mass hysteria over getting electronic boards. As the stuff went up, like we had one component on one board, I think went from about $10 to almost $100. That's just one piece on the board. The boards themselves are usually 30 or something.
Does Is it Pentair making those boards?
Okay, that's a different podcast.
I think that's why China wants to invade Taiwan. They probably see the profit margins on those boards.
No, I mean everything just keeps going up in costs, and that's part of the problem with it. With what you were saying, but it becomes a big deal because you want to make a profitable product, right? At the same time, you also need to fill some of these gaps, and sometimes you have to, not like you said, not put it out as a loss, but not make as much as you would hope.
Yeah.
Until the next generation comes out and different things like that with the boards. So that's something that people don't even think about. So that's a really great point, Richard.
No, all they care about is, can I get a spin disc? Can I get the discs? Can I test? That's it. That's all they care about. They don't know the minutia that goes behind developing these products. And like Richard said, it's not just an overnight thing. It's years, decades in some cases, developing and fine tuning and getting something that you can actually deliver to the public, to your customers, that they're going to want to use. Right. And they're going to continue to use down the road.
Right. So in 2020, late 2020, when we saw this emergency going on, that's when we started looking for plants and trying to get these machines made. And so by the time 2021 and 2022 came on, we had finally enough machines, but still had this backlog to plow through. So it was millions of dollars of investment to take care of our friends in the pool industry.
Oh, yeah. Here comes the embarrassing portion of the show. Excuse me, is that, Richard obviously and the family are heavily involved in LaMotte and do a fantastic job. But Richard's into some other things. And Richard, now I know it's not simply cut glass, but it's like specialty glass that you were into or still into. I'm not really sure. I remember all that period.
Yeah, that was back in the early 2000s. What happened was my wife at the time was making jewelry out of sea glass. And what happened is a lot of guys are like, what the heck is sea glass? And I understand because you're walking the beach and you're checking the waves or other things, maybe what's in the bikinis, but not what's laying on the beach.
The ladies, not the guys in the bikini.
So what happened was she started doing that, and it just there was several opportunities where people wanted to know more about what these things were. So I started doing some history and research because we had to do a lecture, and that led to a book that was pretty successful because we spent a lot of money on it doing color photographs and doing all these things, and end up selling over 120,000 copies of this book.
Yeah, I remember you had a big write-up in the Baltimore Sun back then. Yeah, about your efforts and your wife's efforts with the glass, and I thought that's pretty cool. But that shows, Steve, is that we do have lives other than pool stuff.
Lives outside of pools. And for the guys out there that don't know what sea glass is, to bring it into pools, it's exactly what happens to the pieces of sand in the filter, right? They're sharp at first under a microscope, and then they get washed around, and afterwards it doesn't look like, it gets rounded. So the sea glass, same thing happens with that. It's not these sharp pieces of glass, so now it's these rounded pieces of glass, and they look really beautiful. And then when you put them together, and you can put them in jewelry, like Richard said, and it's a whole industry.
Right.
Right.
It
See,
is.
what you said there is kind of interesting because the glass is mostly sand. Basically, this glass, especially the historical glass, was about 75% sand, and 15% like soda and these other ingredients they use to make it and form it. So really, when you see a broken down piece of glass, sooner or later it's going to go back to where it was at the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, Richard, I guess this is the big question. I mean, I kind of beat you going into retirement by a couple years, but I understand something's coming up like that for you pretty soon, huh?
Yeah, so it should be in January. I might be doing some help on some projects for them and maybe a few things here and there. But right now, yeah, since I'm turning 65 early next year, I figured it's a good time to do some things that are a little more fun. So, it's tough because I'm the last one of about 15 of us that have worked here for
Wow.
years. But we are in great hands. Our new CEO and president, Scott Ansball, is a real sharp guy, and I think really has embraced the history of the company. If you ever get to Newark, you ought to see the display they put up there and the new building up there.
I was going to tell for the listeners who are not terribly familiar with Mid-Atlantic area geography, Newark, Delaware is not terribly far from Chestertown, but maybe an hour up the road a bit.
40 minutes from here, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the location for the new building is perfect because one, it's bigger for you, so you can be able to do more there. But it's not that far away that transportation costs are going to be exorbitant or anything like that. So,
right.
But no, that's exciting to hear. But I do have
Newark,
a bit of advice.
It's Newark, Delaware, not Newark, New Jersey.
There's a difference. Believe me.
Ain't nobody want to go to Newark, New Jersey.
Home with Jeff Flacco.
It's like the difference between Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and Lancaster.
Yeah,
somebody's not from the area if they say Lancaster instead of Lancaster, or Tawnytown, Maryland, instead of T.
I mentioned Joe Flacco. He's from New Jersey, but he went
Greenwich.
to Delaware.
Greenwich, right?
No, but yes,
so I guess I do as somebody who entered the retirement world a couple of years ago. And yes, Richard, I am older than you. Just remember that with retirement, every day is Saturday with an occasional Sunday. Okay, and that it's funny, but and Steve has heard me say this too many times in the past, but I feel like now I'm more busy now in the industry than I was when I was with, the company that began with the letter T.
I was going to ask a question. So Richard, I wanted to know, as somebody who, when you started at LaMotte, that was the year I was born. So I'm 40. So do you have any grand plans for yourself and your family? I mean, you're just going to travel the world and you're going to do some grand stuff? Or like Wayne, he tried to get out, he tried to get away, but they just pulled him back in, right? So, retirement means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And, are you able to, I guess my question really is like, are you going to actually be able to say, yeah, I know you said you're going to stay on some projects for a little while, but, do you plan to kind of keep your, no pun intended, your foot in the water for the years to come? Or are you going to be able to, and I guess that has a lot to do with, talking with your family too, right? Because like if your wife and your kids are like, man, we're ready for you to get out of this. We're ready for you to be done. Then it's a little bit easier for you to step away and go do the vacations and all that stuff where, this has been your life for the last 40, more than that, because this is a family company, right? So you grew up in this, you've seen this your whole life. So I've found that like sometimes it's just hard to step away, right? So I just wanted to find out about your plans in the next couple of years.
Well, I appreciate the question. I think right now I have not made any big commitments to do anything in particular, which I kind of like that. There's been things that I've been toying with for years. One of the things I've always loved doing is teaching people how to play golf, and I might do a little bit of that. But it's really, I like a lot about the water chemistry side of the pool industry and helping people figure out problems. That part I like, versus when's my order coming? And so that part, and like I might do some writing because of, the general industries we've been in. For instance, I live on the water here in the Chesapeake Bay, and there's all this environmental information out there that I've been involved with over the years. So, going out there and helping, I'd love to find a way to help this one stream behind us not come out with milky brown color coming out past my house. Okay, is there a way to do different things to help in different industries with some of the water knowledge I have. But no big plans to travel the world and all that. Again, I was a VP. I was never owner here, so it's not like I'm sitting on top of something that maybe somebody that sold Taylor has.
Yeah, right.
And you said about
really a little bit of everything. I'm just going to try a little bit of everything and do some traveling, but I haven't really. I'm so focused on trying to get everything settled here. I haven't really looked too far, but I have 2 years. My accountant says you need to work for 2 more years until you're 67 before you go on Social Security. So,
now, Richard, you were talking about that stream behind your house. And one of the things, I did a little bit of research on LaMotte before we came onto the show, just to make sure that I knew a little bit about your history and things like that. And it said that one of the industries that you're also into, other than the pools, is soil. Testing for different things with soil. And, does that stream, behind your house, does that fall into that testing of like the what's underneath the water and like what's coming out with it, or how does that kind of work and tie into what you guys do as a whole?
Well, it's interesting you mention that, because I can go back all the way to when I was a kid. And my grandfather, I remember going to his house, sitting in his little office, and he'd start this speech about how the phosphates and the nitrogens being laid on all the soil around the Chesapeake Bay are running off into the bay and causing algae blooms, screwing up the bay and all that. Meanwhile, I was like nodding, like, yeah, because at the end he'd give me a piece of chocolate. I just wanted to get to the chocolate.
Okay. Get it finished, yeah.
And he said it's going to mess up your fishing, because I used to fish right down the hill from his house and all that. And within 5 to 7 years, he was right. I mean, all the milfoil, all these things are really good for fishing, and the creeks just off the Chesapeake Bay were gone. And so phosphorus and nitrogen laid on these fields going out into the bay are just as bad as phosphorus and nitrates in the pools. So really, you do have it. And so if you do soil testing, we've done soil testing. And what they generally do is, let's say if you have a farm field, they pick 4 places around the field, they bring a sample in, they run a test on it. And we used to do a lot of that in the old days, but then a lot of the universities and a lot of other people started doing that with more automated equipment. So most of our soil testing right now is for gardeners. And I can tell you, when COVID went down and all these people were home, all of a sudden the garden soil test gets
that skyrocketed.
Yeah, it's like when COVID hit, we had all these people asking for things, but no, you're right. That's a good point, Steve, that whatever's on the soil generally runs off into the water. So if there is some pollution on the soil, and that's why they check for a lot of different nutrients. So the farmers want to know how much nutrient to add or not add. But also, you don't want to have things in there that run off into the bay, because around the Chesapeake Bay, most people know there's a buffer zone called critical areas, and you cannot build within that zone unless you already had a house there. And so it's very important to keeping the bay clean and to keep the crabs going and all that, because I know you probably love a good crab cake, Wayne.
Oh, yeah.
Guys, I have to tell you, from coming from New Jersey, I'm so jealous of where you guys are in the country, because I am such an avid fisherman, and the fishing kind of here in California kind of sucks compared to the East Coast, because there's so many different seasons. And my favorite type of fishing is striper fishing. And, the stripers start out in the Chesapeake Bay, and they come out and they run up to Maine, and, you get 2 chances in the spring and the fall to catch them. And that was the first time that I ever really felt like I caught a fish, right? Because I had my little treble hook, which is that little, because you go out and you catch a bait fish, and then you bait that, that striper into getting it, where everything else kind of feels like luck, where that was the first time I really fell in love with fishing, because I was like, I did that and I earned that fish, and that's why I've been in love with stripers ever since.
That's good, because they're good eating too. So near our house, I'm pretty far up the bay from the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. So if you know where the Chesapeake Bay Bridge is, it kind of cuts across to Annapolis, the Naval Academy, then you go north to Baltimore. So I look from my house right out of Baltimore. Like when they do a flyover for the stadium, I can kind of see the planes.
Nice.
My point is, as you come up the bay, these dolphins have been coming up the bay recently.
Yeah.
And my wife was at home cooking. All of a sudden, this dolphin's just flying up out of the water and doing a little rainbow dance. And that's something, believe me, we've never seen. It's there's changes in the environment, changes, all sorts of things going on. But they're chasing those stripers up the bay.
I remember when they found sharks in the bay? Yeah, which is, well, obviously the bay is salted water, but still, that's not something you talk about, or you realize that are also in the bay too, or sharks, mostly lower, but in the bay. But yeah, it's
the whole peninsula was underwater at one time. People were drilling wells for drinking water. Shark teeth will come out when they're drilling wells. And on the western side of the bay, they find these megalodon teeth that are like the size of a slice of pizza. And if you've never seen a megalodon, these are real sharks that were gigantic. Think of Sharknado times 2. And you can look it up. They're pretty fascinating. And these teeth they found over there in the cliffs just south of Annapolis, Calvert Cliffs, they call it. It's amazing what they found from the old days.
Yeah.
So,
well, Richard,
I have another question for you, Richard.
Go ahead.
The pool industry kind of ruined me a little bit in a sense of I love hot tubs, and I've always loved hot tubs, and I playing football for such a long time. I got a lot of back and neck injuries and stuff, and it's so therapeutic and so helpful, and I'm so just shit scared of going into commercial hot tubs because I teach the CPO class and, I've been in the industry for 20 years. So when I go on vacation, I'm bringing, not a full spin test or, a full Taylor test kit or whatever it may be. I'm bringing some strips and I'm at least wanting to see that, yes, there is chlorine in the water and, that there's not no chlorine in the water. So, am I crazy, or is this something that you also do and you also recognize? And tell the viewers out there, are you using commercial hot tubs on vacation or are you not?
Yeah, first of all, I've kind of avoided them more recently than I used to before I knew more. And so I have taken strips with me and done just what you did. As long as there's some chlorine or bromine in there, you're okay. But I don't have the desire to get in commercial hot tubs. You might, because fortunately the back pain hasn't hit me. I didn't play enough football. I played Little League football, not but now I think it really is something that people be aware of. It is a good idea to check sanitizer, especially if you want to kick back and really get in these things for a long time. And this is where testing is so important. I mean, some of the stories in the industry, the guy, I think there's the couple out, there's a Victoria, BC or somewhere out there, they bought a little portable hot tub from Walmart or something and went in there, got in it, and both died of Legionnaire's disease because they didn't know they had to put chemicals, So, of course, that's a private thing, but these public hot tubs, I'm not thrilled about going in them, but it's the type of thing where if you check it, that's fine. If you smell a little chlorine or sanitizer, that's probably maybe a good thing. At least maybe some still there, even though it might be tied up as chloramines. But usually they're using bromine in most of the public ones. When you say, Wayne,
I think so, because of and not to get into the whole bromine discussion, but bromine's a little bit more efficient as a sanitizer and oxidizer in hot water situations than chlorine is. Now, chlorine's okay too, but bromine's a little bit more workable. Maybe that's the right word. But yeah.
It works best at different levels of pH where the chlorine is going to go down.
Right, exactly.
The efficiency, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's true. But it's amazing.
I'm the same way, Richard. I avoid them.
Yeah.
I just don't, because I don't want to sit in other people's bathwater. That's pretty basic right there.
Yeah, like kiddie pools and things. Yeah, it's tough when you hear the stories of what's happened out there in the past, but a lot of this could be controlled if they just did the testing. We have health inspectors that told me all the time they go to a pool, and let's say at 9:00 in the morning, the results will be written out for the entire day already. Because come on, kids.
Or you write 7.4 pH at the top of the page and draw an arrow down the column. I've seen those too.
That's so awesome. So, Richard, I have one last question for you. As someone who probably just got past the midpoint in my career, I probably see 20, 25 years left in the pool industry for me. And, we focus a lot on this show. We come out on Thursdays, and we focus a lot on talking to guys that own their own companies, especially single polars that are out there that are just beginning. And I talk a lot about my beginnings and, starting a company from nothing and, breaking off from my brother and, going out on my own and starting a company with a bunch of debt. And now, having a semi-successful company 10 years down the road. Is there any advice that you have for the guys that are just starting out in the industry now or a few years in, and it's obviously a bigger company like you guys, you not struggled to get through the pandemic, but it was hard for you. It was hard for some of the bigger companies. So what advice do you have for these new guys, these greenhorns that are out there, that are trying to make it in the industry, to make it a little bit easier for them and have those transitions and, not have so many issues moving forward? What would you have to say to them?
The easiest thing right off the bat is to make use of technology. I mean, one of the things that was great when we talked about using, the phones with some of the apps that we have, as far as, here's your results or whatever, is one of the guys in the booth who was visiting said, "This is great. I really want to make sure my staff sends that text or email right away, so it goes right to that business. Go right to the owner of the pool, because he's in a business meeting and someone goes, 'What is that?' 'Oh, that's just my pool guy sending me my results.' And it's like, 'Who's your pool guy?'" But just being able to, because one of the biggest problems we have with, let's say, small vendors around here, whether it's a repairman or something like that, is not knowing if and when he's coming or if he's been there or whatever. And I think communicating to the customer puts you a notch above the other guy who's not doing that. So that's number one. The secondly is just showing them that you care, and just, if you find something, report it, take a picture of it or something like that, just showing them that you care. But I would say using technology and definitely do a full set of tests on the water chemistry on a routine basis. When you have a pool dialed in, it may not happen quickly, but I've had folks talk to me that during the summer, sometimes if somebody's on well water, all of a sudden the iron can get out of control fast, because as that aquifer goes down, what might have been a 0.1 on iron just all of a sudden goes to 0.5 or 2, and they get major problems. So doing a routine test that covers all the tests, and that's not just because I'm in the testing business, but it's one less headache you have to worry about later on when they have stains in their pool or something. And also they can show that, say, "Look, this is what I'm doing for you. I'm doing this test. This is what I'll do for you monthly," or whatever. Because the more they show professionalism, the easier it is to hold on to that account and have them come back to you and say, "Hey, I have a problem." I had a friend who had a house down in Florida. He didn't go down there all the time, but he had a neighbor contact him because there was water running out of his nearest garage. It was coming out of the lanai because the guy that serviced the pool left the water on, and the whole pool was flooding out to the street. That's not a good way to keep a customer.
No.
Yeah.
So I think it's really improving the communication back to the customer is great. It's been a frustration for me recently, because we sometimes don't know, based on parts we're getting, a firm date to give somebody. This happened during, some of COVID, where things just weren't available and you couldn't really tell people, especially distributors and stuff, they want a firm date. And it's not easy sometimes. Like if you have to do a repair, until you have that part in your hand, it's hard to give a firm date. And so all you can do is be as honest as possible. And that's really, I think, would help in the long run keep these guys in business.
Yeah. Perfect. That's a perfect answer. So what I'm hearing is communication is key, and do what you say you're going to do, which is the points that we bring home on the Talking Pools podcast all the time.
Right. Yeah. I also want to point out that I think, Richard, you used a word that perfectly describes you, which is professionalism. Over the decades, over the time that we've known each other, personally, you have been nothing but a good, close friend, and we always go out of the way to say hi to each other when we can and things like that. And you think we all might be super cutthroat, and we're, well, no, not really. We're all trying to do a job, and trying to do it the best way we possibly can. And having people like you, Richard, and out there in the industry, and there's a few others too, is just a boon and a positive for us that we can't help but appreciate you spending your time with us today and giving us a little bit more a background behind LaMotte and where you all are and where you all want to be down the road. We appreciate that. We also appreciate your sponsorship very much. We do. Talking Pools is pretty well known within the podcast industry and for the pool and spa industry. So given the opportunity for you to come on board with us for this time period and just to talk, down to earth stuff, down to earth information, we really are people. We're not just people who work for a company. We're really just people. And that's what makes us I think, more into the day-to-day kind of work ethic that people need in order to keep this industry going on. So Richard, I thank you personally and professionally. Are there any parting words you want to leave us all here? Something that you will be remembered for years now. So be careful. Choose your words right.
I did think of one story. It was one of the funnier ones I'd heard through the years from a guy in Atlantic City, Larry Pennant with Pool Doctor up in Fairfield, Connecticut or whatever. But he called me one time and said, "You're not going to believe what happened." There was a public pool, called him saying, "Something's wrong with my DPD. It's not reading chlorine. It's not reading chlorine." And so he went out to this pool and he's like, "What's going on?" And he tested. He's like, "Yeah, I'm not getting chlorine either. But this doesn't make sense. We got all these pucks we put into the skimmer." And he opens up the skimmer and pulls out the basket. He's like, "These look kind of strange." So he's like, "Show me where your chlorine is." And so they go into this shed right next to the public pool, and there's 2 trash cans on the wall. One said chlorine, the other one said urinal pucks. So guess what was in the skimmer?
I'm going to remember that
Larry,
one.
so did you decide to leave yourself in their skimmer? Or?
I just got a visual.
No, that was one of the more abstract ones. There's other ones like, a woman goes into the store and says, how come my strip doesn't work on the second and third time I try it? And it works the first time and not the second and third time.
I love it.
Yeah, great stories.
Well, gang, that's it for today, I think. Again, Richard, thank you so much. This has been great catching up and talking. And guys, as always with Talking Pools, if you have any comments, both positive and negative, we take them all, or any thoughts on ideas for future topics to talk about, any technical questions, make sure to send them to talkingpools@gmail.com. And if we use you on the air, we'll send you a little thank you gift. But again, Richard, we appreciate your time. Thank you. And try to work on your golf game a little bit. Okay.
Yeah, now I have time. So
I know the feeling. I'm still stuck at it, but that's okay. Well, thanks, guys, and we will be talking at you later.
thanks.
Take care.
Good to see you, Steve. Thanks, Wayne.
Thank you.
See you again. All right.
Bye-bye.
See you guys.
Okay, we're off.
Awesome. That was great. Thank you so much, Richard.
Guy worked out. Sorry about all these buttons. I just didn't know that it has so many speaker options on this thing.
That's okay. See, you learn something new every day.